Hello and welcome to this special Green Room event. It's part of a series of concerts that's curated by Jocelyn Freeman. They've taken place at Blackheath Halls. We had one last year in 2020, that was Schubert's Die Schöne Müllerin. And today we are going to explore a concert that took place at Blackheath Halls in February. But there wasn't an audience there. It was just performer and the other performer. We have a pianist and a singer performing the last cycle, or is it a cycle of Schubert, more to be discussed later, his famous swan song, Schwanengesang. I'm delighted to be joined by Jocelyn Freeman, who is the curator of the song series Wanderlust. And today we're also joined by Stephan Loges, who is the bass baritone, who took part in that performance too, and also the expert in German song, Dr. Natasha Loges. Stephan and Natasha are part of the same extraordinarily musical household. So they're here in one bubble, and then another bubble, me, Natasha Riordan, and then we've got Jocelyn Freeman, the pianist and curator of the Song Cycle series, joining us too. So let's get started. Let's find out what the performance was. What did we hear? And Stephan and Jocelyn, what was it like to perform? So it's the end of the series. And so you've chosen to finish with a swan song of sorts.
Yes, thank you so much, Natasha. So the series comprises of the 3 Schubert song cycles and a Beethoven concert that was done earlier last year. These were all recorded at Blackheath Halls, and I wanted to do the Schubert cycles chronologically. Wilhelm Müller plays a large part in the series, being the poet for the first 2 Schubert cycles. And then this last cycle, I know we're going to hear more about it later today from Natasha Loges, but it's not so much of a cycle as a collection of poems published posthumously, very much, but written in the last year of Schubert's life. So it's quite a journey to go on.
Great. Well, thank you for setting us up there, Jocelyn. And I would have absolutely loved to have been at this concert. The last concert that you performed back in, I think it was September, wasn't it? September 2020. Die Schöne Müllerin was absolutely spellbinding and sort of the perfect way to re-engage with live music with such an incredible story. And yes, I can't wait for everybody to see the video of the concert. So I'm going to cut to Natasha. Professor Natasha, I want to give you your full title. I wanted to ask you, could you give us a little context for this last cycle, this last collection of Schubert songs?
It was such an extraordinary time in Schubert's life, and we have to remember he was really near his death. And that's what gave this collection its name. And the name was given by the publisher after Schubert's death. The weird thing about those few months in which these songs and various other bits of music were composed is that Schubert is still going at full tilt. He's composing all sorts of things, the late, great 3 piano sonatas, there are symphonic sketches, there are other songs. And then in the middle of this, there are these 14, which his enterprising publisher gathers together and releases under one title. So we have to time travel back to 1828. This is a sort of key year in Schubert's life. And the songs are composed in August and October. Schubert died on the 19th of November. So we're really up against his death. That's where we are. He's still so young. I think that's what people think about most. And what makes this whole situation so tragic is this sense of all of this burning potential to be fulfilled. I mean, I think we did very well with what Schubert left in his short life, but it's this sort of forward momentum that I think about most in those months of his life, I think.
And was this collection published? What was the reason it was published? Was it monetary? His publisher was sort of running on his coattails just after he died. So they wanted to squeeze as much money out of Schubert as possible, or was there more of an artistic sense that yes, it was a cycle? Did Schubert leave us any clues as to whether he intended for it to remain as a whole?
It most definitely was not a cycle, just to put that one to bed. The songs were composed in 2 separate phases, but they were close together in the manuscript sources. And I think the publisher, Tobias Haslinger, he was really, really brilliant in his own right. And he recognized Schubert's genius in a way that lots of people didn't at the time. Schubert was not terribly famous. He was just on the verge of being famous. So Haslinger took those songs, understood how powerful it would be for people to think of this young, incredibly creative man dying, thought of the title, Swan Song, Schwanengesang, and put it out there. And he sort of advertised it with Winterreise, which was a collection of songs that had made a real mark on Schubert's circle. So he sort of linked the two together. And so Schwanengesang sort of emerged as a cycle alongside Winterreise. I mean, I think Haslinger was really very brilliant in doing this, because if we think about Schubert writing more than 600 songs, the vast majority of them are not known to listeners, and to put them in a cycle, put them in a collection under one label, just lifted these 14 out of the rest. So yeah, that's the background to the cycle. It's really only in the 20th century that people started performing them regularly as a sequence. I think they work brilliantly, actually, both ways.
I think it's sort of, in a way, it's nice that they're not a story in the same way that Die Schöne Müllerin is and Winterreise is, because in a way you can feel a little bit more detached because you're so invested in Winterreise and Die Schöne Müllerin, and you know, they're not the happiest tales with the happiest endings. It's nice to be able to sort of dip in and out of the moods and not maybe feel like you're sort of in this complete claustrophobic romantic space. I don't know, what, Stephan, what do you think? What's it like as a performer performing this group where it's not necessarily a collection, but I guess you probably still have to have some sort of momentum going when you're performing?
Yeah, actually, you've just given me a really nice bridge here, because I was just going to talk exactly about that, because I think one of the things that probably would have come up at some point during our short discussion is the fact that it wasn't a concert. It was a kind of this weird hybrid that we have now of a recording session stroke concert. We're trying to create the atmosphere of a concert and the continuity of a concert, but of course there's no one there. And what you just said about Müllerin and Winterreise being much more of a story, I think in a weird way, I'm obviously, I don't know because I've only done the Schwanengesang, but I think I would have found Winterreise or Müllerin easier to do in these circumstances, because it's much more kind of people from the outside looking in, and I'm telling my own story, and I can get completely absorbed in that story without the need of an audience, if that makes sense. But with Schwanengesang, exactly because it's so much more different vignettes of emotions and songs, and having an audience there would be a huge help of being able to relate to people and find a physical connection to people and emotional connection that makes it much easier to get from one song to the other, because it isn't a continuous story in which I'm completely kind of wrapped up. So the weird thing about Schwanengesang, and I think anyone who there are certain things like the Eichendorff Liederkreis by Schumann, which is similarly not a connected story, and yet when you sing it, you do find connections between the songs that might be there, might have been in Schubert's mind or not. I mean, I know Graham Johnson, who wrote, of course, fantastically about Schubert. I think the only other person I can think of is Susan Ewens, who writes about Schubert like he does. And he makes it very clear that of course there are connections, like the whole water theme in the Heine songs between song 10 and 13. And then, of course, the Rellstab songs, almost all of them have the kind of distant beloved thing. So there's always a lover somewhere in there. So there's a red thread there, but not in the same way as in Winterreise or Müllerin.
Natasha, there are some songs in this collection that have become massive hits for Schubert. And, you know, as we've said, he wrote over 600 songs. And I find one of the nicest things is finding a song that you've never heard before. And it turns out it's actually pretty good, because he certainly was the master of his craft. And I find it amazing that actually some of the songs that I got to know before I knew anything about these big cycles are songs in this collection too. Could you tell me about the sort of the famous songs that we're going to hear?
Well, there's one showstopper that emerged very early on, and this is the famous Ständchen, the serenade, Leise flehen meine Lieder. And it's such a perfect melody. It's one of those things where Schubert seems to breathe in the air of Italian opera and just exhale this gorgeous, spontaneous line. And he's not sort of, this sounds dreadful to say it, but he's not sort of being clever. We've got very straightforward harmony and very straightforward phrase structures, but that melody has a spontaneity and a communicative quality, which is just, it's pure Schubert, but it's also pure Italian. And there was a whole culture of serenade singing throughout the 19th century. They really did this, and I don't know how they did it given weather, but there are lots of accounts of people strumming guitars, like actually strumming guitars outside windows and things. Really. And this particular tune was arranged for every instrumental combination that you can possibly imagine, and for choir, male voices, female voices, you name it. So it was one of those tunes, a little bit like Der Lindenbaum from Winterreise, which just was in everybody's minds. It was just part of the cultural zeitgeist. And I think it's also been translated into every language that you can imagine. And one of the most important people who made it famous was Franz Liszt, the pianist who had this sort of showy international career that Schubert could only have dreamed of, who took this beautiful melody and turned it into this pianistic pyrotechnic fest on the concert stage. And that was also published and people bought it. So I love the way one thing can sort of detach and then have its own amazing journey. And then when you trace it back, you see it is in this collection called Schwanengesang. For me, when I listen to the whole set, it's the one that always slightly stands out. And I feel this sort of warmth in myself when I think, God, that was so beautiful. How did he think of it? I think lots of people have that kind of relationship to that particular song.
He's sort of the golden songwriter of the age, isn't he? It's like today trying to get that 3-minute hit. Schubert absolutely nailed it. And you're totally right. I think I've heard it for combinations with, you know, a kazoo and a hairbrush. Every single sound making object has been included. Jocelyn, Natasha just mentioned the Liszt arrangements of Schubert as well. I wanted to ask you about that in a minute, but first of all, I wanted to just find out from you, what was it like for you performing? Because this series is something that you've curated, you've spent so much time thinking about, and you know, it's really admirable and impressive that you still did it. I think that's really, really special, because a lot of things have been cancelled and not having an audience may have been too much for some, but I think it's really fantastic that you still did it, and we're so lucky to have the result. And I wondered, for you, what's it been like bringing this to fruition and to perform without an audience?
I mean, it's absolutely wonderful to perform the Schubert. He has to be right up there as one of my top favorite composers to perform, and just to go into song with some amazing artists like Stephan here has been a really great way to carry me through the pandemic, actually, and to have these little moments to look forward to. I think performing without an audience, I mean, it's great to be making music. First and foremost, it's really wonderful to be out there creating and to be sharing. We definitely feel the absence of an audience. An audience is so important in this repertoire. So it's changed the sort of the genre in some ways, because Lieder is set up to be so intimate and to be done in a small living room, essentially. We've lost a little bit of that, but I think everyone who loves Lieder is trying to keep the Lieder pan bubbling, really, until we can get to a place where we share the songs with audiences on a close plane, really. But yes, first and foremost, I'm really pleased to have got this far, and I can't wait to welcome audiences back.
I think at the moment there is something really appealing about performances of a really intimate nature, not just in music. I know that some theatrical performances have happened. National Theatre did a play where it was just 2 actors, which might sound potentially a little bit dry, but I think we are so focused at the moment on so much that's going on that's out of our control. There's something about being able to invest in really switching on your ears and listening, and song is just the most wonderful way of doing that. And actually, I wondered, Jocelyn, from your perspective, what's the current state of song? I'm thinking about how Schubert, obviously, he's number one, Mr. Song, he did everything. Where are we now? Do we have a same kind of culture of song? Because I know you just said that concerts are very different things now. I'll ask Natasha and Stephan about this as well, but what do you think is the current, where is song in, I guess, the kind of canon? You know, is it important still?
Certainly from where I sit, it's 100% important, and it always will be, probably because I love it so much. And I still have permission to sort of share that passion with the world, really, and introduce people to new music, which could be song if they're not leader geeks like I am. I think at the moment the state is a little bit in flux with live concerts not really happening here in the UK, but I mean, wherever music is happening, that's fantastic. And wherever audiences are listening live, that's amazing. It's also worth saying that I think every artist appreciates being listened to. So even if there is a web divide, that's still really great. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the comeback.
What about you, Natasha? What do you think about the current state of song? I know that, you know, you have such an interest in Schubert and Brahms, and you know so much about this period and the context and what was going on. Now, looking at where song is, could you give me a sort of an idea of the landscape?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature. There are two things which are happening, which I think are really exciting, but we don't know quite where they're going yet. The first is all of the awareness of repertoires which have been overlooked for a long time. So I'm getting in my inbox and through social media links to concerts of songs, principally, that I did not even know existed throughout, you know, composed throughout the 19th century, say by women composers or by composers from minority ethnic backgrounds or from, you know, very far-flung corners of the world. So that's one thing which I think perhaps the internet has democratized the performance space a little bit. And I think that's a really powerful thing. That's something I'd like to hang on to. And the other thing which has really struck me is how much music is still being composed in these last months. Once composers have been able to recover from that initial shock and the way their lives have been transformed. I've heard examples just in recent weeks of people composing, performing different parts in different parts of the world, putting them together, having a concert. Yes, it's an online concert, but actually in terms of the audience experience, it's not really different from watching, say, a Wigmore live, or indeed the concert that is going to be screened this evening. So for me, I think that there are some really exciting currents, and I think people will always need to sing. I think that song is such a fundamental part of human nature that regardless of what technology or language or whatever, song will find a way out. That's what I think anyway.
That's such a lovely, optimistic way of looking at things. And it sounds like there's a lot of exciting things that have been going on. And also, as you say, Natasha, the internet, I mean, sure, it has its faults, but it's also a great way for people to be connected in a way that's never happened before. So that's amazing, and looking forward to seeing what happens. Stephan, what do you think about the current state of song? And also, I wondered for you specifically during this lockdown, what's singing been like for you? How has your schedule changed, and how have you responded to that?
Singing has been basically me and the shower, or me and my little piano room. That's what singing has been like, to be honest. Yeah, basically on a personal side, and I have to say, probably like many other people, for some part, especially of the early part of when COVID hit first, I found it quite difficult to get out of bed and find music exciting. I was depressed, but it was really a massive hit to what life was like. And you know, I know how lucky we all are. You know, we're sitting in nice houses, having our food to eat. So I mean, I'm complaining at a very high level. Yeah, I'm aware of that I'm luckier than most people, and through all of this time. But definitely, singing, it took me some time And then slowly I started to think, actually, I can't just sit here and feel sorry for myself. I have to do something. So I started to practice more again. And then, as Natasha said, I really started also to look at repertoire that I hadn't looked at before. Of course, the Black Lives Matter thing happened, which also, of course, suddenly a lot of music that people didn't look at before suddenly became important. And just to add one thing to the things that Natasha and Jocelyn said, I also feel optimistic, and I know that money in terms of putting concerts on will be a huge issue over the coming years. After all of this, if we go back to a more normal life. But one big chance, I think, is that if people have to look at money and have to look at how they attract audiences, but in a more intimate way, is that I think song and shaming music is the perfect way to do this. So I really, really hope that there will be when we come out of this, and so that not just at Wigmore Hall, but also at maybe bigger concert halls or theaters that normally wouldn't put on song, that we can find a way of not putting on the same 3 Shakespeare plays or the same 3 Verdi or Wagner operas, but maybe thinking, how can you connect theater with song, for instance? I mean, there are lots of ways to have an actor and a singer on stage, or also recitals instead of doing only song. Go back to what Natasha knows much more about than I do, which is the way this all started, is that you would have concerts where you have a piano piece, you have a short orchestral piece, you have a few songs in the middle, so that we get away from this idea that it has to always be just that one thing for 2 hours on end. Also talking about short attention spans, that might also be something that people will actually be more prepared to go to when it's a bit more of a mixture of things.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remove these pedestals upon which we've placed art. And as you say, you make things more accessible. It doesn't degrade what they are by, maybe putting it in a slightly different context. And I really hope that actually, I mean, I love song myself personally, but I do think it's such a good way to connect with people. And as you said, there are ways of using other art forms, like with actors and singers at the same time. And there was a concert actually recently that was recorded at Wigmore Hall with Alice Coote singing, and Ray Fiennes, he was reciting poetry, and Christian Blackshaw on the piano. And I found that suddenly my short attention span was really long, because it was really varied and such an interesting look at sort of the human condition. So I really hope that there might be a few changes. And Jocelyn, obviously I want to find out from you what your lockdown has been like. And I skipped a question earlier that I was going to ask you about the Liszt and Schubert little sort of relationship, although they weren't together. You have performed some of the arrangements recently online, haven't you? And I wondered, what's been keeping you going musically through lockdown? Has there been anything that you've discovered, any new music or anything on the horizon that you can tell us about?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when lockdown first struck, I decided, having just had the initial Die Schöne Müllerin concert postponed indefinitely, I decided to keep going with Die Schöne Müllerin, but obviously we weren't allowed to meet and rehearse. And so what I did is I got out the Liszt arrangements of the 6 Müller Lieder, and decided to put them on Patreon, do 1 or 2 a month, and then live stream the whole thing after several months. It's quite different experience, really, when we're initially thinking about these intricate, delicate accompaniments on a modern instrument, and then to turn up the razzmatazz and get the notes flying with all these extra bits of decoration. It was a good pianistic challenge, and sort of, I suppose, kicked me into action and off the sofa slightly, though at times I felt like I was not being kind to myself by placing this expectation over myself. So that was my initial experience with lockdown. And more recently on Patreon, again, I've been looking at the music of Thomas Tompkins, who was born about a quarter of a mile from where I was in West Wales, and Morvith Owen, who was, she grew up in Swansea. So this is a little, I guess, slightly nostalgic journey into music from my homeland. So yeah, both of those have been quite interesting to discover, and also Thomas Tomkins being on a modern instrument as I'm playing it on my piano here. It's quite a different experience, but just amazing music and a really nice chance to explore music that I probably wouldn't otherwise have given myself time to look at properly.
Well, I think it sounds from all of you like there are so many positive things to be thinking about at the moment, and it's really such a joy to be even speaking to you about music, because obviously that's the reason why we get out of bed in the morning, isn't it? And I just have one more question, which is a little cheeky and maybe I shouldn't ask, but I'd love to know from each of you whether you have a favourite song in the collection we will hear this evening. And I'm going to start with Stephan. You don't have time to think, you just have to go and tell me which is your favourite song.
Well, I would have to say Taubenpost. The last.
No, you
Yes.
nicked
Yeah.
my.
You can have the same one, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, well, if Natasha goes for Taubenpost, I can go for Fischermädchen. But actually, it's really, to be honest, it is really difficult. It is a really.
Okay, Natasha, what could yours be, I wonder?
It's just gotta be Taubenpost. Like Stephan, you've gone through that dreadful gloom, these 6 Heine songs that make you want to kill yourself. It's like plumbing the depths of psychotic despair. And then there's just lovely, lovely gem right at the end. And I've played that song many times and it sort of chugs away so satisfyingly underneath your hands. And I think, well, Stephan has obviously sung it for me many times. I don't think it is possible to sing that song without smiling.
That's perfect. Jocelyn, which would yours be?
I think I'm going to go in the complete opposite direction to the Logeses, actually. Maybe it's just today, but I love Aufenthalt because it's got this dark brooding, just chugging away, and like it's so satisfying to play because of these little waves that keep coming out of the piano, and it dovetails so nicely with the voice. They're sort of constantly having a little chat or argument or make of it what you will between the voice and piano, and it's when we're in a pandemic mode and we're sort of getting a little bit grumpy, like a song like that just is an affirmation that other people have felt like this and then gone on to the Taubenpost.
Well, thank you for sharing your favourites. I also love the idea just that the collection ends with a little pigeon, and we don't really know if it's successful. Who knows? But I think you're right, Stephan, in that it is sort of a perfect summation of Schubert, because obviously he crafted these great giants of classical music repertoire, but in this tiny little song, it's not the most technically advanced, but at the end you just think, it's pretty special. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me for this special virtual green room chat, and cannot wait to view the concert later. So that's a performance by Jocelyn Freeman and Stephan Loges of Schubert's Schwanengesang. And thank you for joining me, and a special thanks to Professor Natasha Loges as well.